Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate it. If you'll look on either side of my screen, you'll see two familiar friendly faces, Jeff Morley, say hi, Jeff, and his father, Craig Morley,
Hello.
both of whom happen to be state certified general real estate appraisers in Utah, Arizona, and Nevada. Both of them have been on the Utah State Appraisal Board, and both of them have chaired the Utah State Appraisal Board. Both of them are active nationally. So, in other words, we've got some folks here this morning who know how to answer the questions that we've got. So, gentlemen, thank you for being here. I appreciate your time, I appreciate your expertise, and I appreciate the fact that you're willing to come here, spend a few minutes with us, and tackle some of the issues that we're going to tackle today. Now, Jeff, uh, if somebody needs to get in touch with you, what is your email address?
Appreciate it, Tim. I've got several. Maybe the best one is jmorley, Morley, at accurity, ACCURITY.com.
And the J is just initial J. It's not the name J because your name's Jeff. Okay. All right.
Correct.
And Craig, what's your email address?
Best email address for me is valupro@gmail.com. There's no E in value, so it's VALUPRO@gmail.com.
Okay, very good. Yeah, Craig went to college, but spelling was not his strong point. Anyway,
Well,
we
you soon discover that you can't always get the addresses you want on Gmail. So I had to be dyslexic to
yeah.
get an email address that I thought was at least something close to what I wanted it to be.
Oh, well, okay, good deal. All right. So we've got Jeff's phone, Jeff's number up on the screen. We got, or excuse me, email address up on the screen. Craig's email address up on the screen. Both of these gentlemen are personal friends. If you call them, they will talk to you. You might have to go through, but you'll eventually get them. It's that is their nature. So please feel free. And then again, my email address is up on the phone, or up on the phone. Hello, is up on the screen. So if you need to get in touch with me, please feel free to do so. Gentlemen, if we may, let's get into it. The first observation that we have is we're seeing that the GSEs want more, especially when it comes to certain adjustments. So let's start with Craig. Craig, from a standpoint of the GSEs wanting more, is this legitimate, or are they just trying to get rid of us? What's going on?
Well, Tim, you and I had a chance to sit down at dinner with Lyle Radke and Scott Reuter from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and as they express some of the concerns that they have on the reports that they actually see, frequently what happens is that there is simply no support for the adjustments that are being put into an appraisal, and they would like to have a better job of the appraiser explaining where those adjustments come from. Well, one of the things that I thought was particularly interesting was a graph that Scott had put up showing the state by state average sales price per square foot with the average adjustment made for square footage across the entire country. And it was interesting because while the properties in states with high overall sales prices per square foot were a little higher, they weren't dramatically higher than homes with low overall sales prices per square foot. And the comment was, intuitively you would expect to see a tighter relationship between the contributory square footage value and the adjustments being applied. And it just doesn't seem to be happening. Now, the adjustments being applied might be appropriate, but you would think that if I've got a state where the average sales price per square foot is $400 or $500 per square foot, and their adjustments for that additional living space is $50 a square foot, whereas I go to an area where the average sales price is $150 a square foot and the adjustments are $30 or $40, you would expect to see a higher, a closer relationship. And the problem seems to be that as appraisers, we're not doing a very good job of explaining where that adjustment came from. And if the adjustment's appropriate, that's fine. But I think they're looking for better support. And as they frequently say, we're not asking you to prove it, we're asking you to support it. And so I think that is illustrative of some of the things they see at a more macro level, that the relationship between the adjustment and what's actually happening in the market doesn't seem to be correlated very well.
So your take on what both Lyle and Scott said is that they're looking for appraisers. They're really not looking for more. They're not looking for more analytics or more analyses. They're looking for us to support our analyses with something other than what Scott so descriptively called atmospheric extraction. Correct?
Exactly. Well, and I think one of the things that was expressed is that support isn't restating what you obviously did on the adjustment grid. Support isn't coming in and saying, well, I adjusted the square footage at $40 a square foot. Well, anybody can see that that was the case. I think what they're looking for is, where did the $40 per square foot come from? How did you determine that that is the number that was appropriate for the assignment? And that seems to be, and you know, Tim, you and I and Jeff have all seen reports where if there is a comment, it's not particularly compelling. And I think what they're looking for is, show me where the number came from. And that seems to be the area where, at a larger scale perspective, seems to be somewhat deficient.
Let's hold that thought of greater explanation. Okay, Jeff, please let me put the same question to you. In other words, the GSEs are asking for more. What are your comments on that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, definitely agree with, my dad's perspective and, what he shared there, Tim. I think more, the way I interpret it, and as I've had some conversations with them as well, is really better support for what's being done. And I don't think that means that nobody is meeting the standard that they're looking for, but I do think that they get frustrated when, that example that Scott illustrated and I've seen the same graph and chart of, wildly different price points across the country, and yet adjustment rates that don't seem to really reflect reality. At the end of the day, we've got to do something that's credible. And I think sometimes the concern is that if it doesn't appear that the appraiser's analysis is matching what the market is doing, it calls into question the credibility of the report, of that particular appraiser. And again, that's not to say that every appraiser is doing things that way. I was having a conversation with Danny Wiley from Freddie Mac, who was just talking about anecdotally being able to look at how appraisers are adjusting, and not only this concept of are we just using the same adjustment rate across the board for GLA, but also looking at and analyzing, is an appraiser using the same adjustment rate for all property types that they're doing, from low price manufactured housing to high-end luxury condos or whatever else. And I can see where they're coming from if the question or the concern is this appraiser just plugs in one number every single time for a GLA adjustment, regardless of the property type and the price point in that market in which they're appraising. The analysis needs to be credible is what it boils down to. And so I don't know if they're asking for more in terms of content or volume. I think what they're asking for is more credible analysis that is reasonably supported by the market data for the property type and the segment in the market in which the appraiser is appraising.
Gentlemen, let's hold these thoughts on the GSEs asking for more, because we're going to revisit it in a minute. Let's go on to the second part of the question, which is, but AMCs generally are offering less. So what is an appraiser to do? The GSEs want more, and the AMCs are saying, well, we're not that busy. We got to make a buck, blah, 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 blah. So we're going to offer you $300 for this appraisal. And now the appraiser is looking at a dilemma. Okay, do I take the $300 and make a little money? Or do I turn that job down, knowing I might get a more expensive one? Or do I keep playing solitaire on my computer? So, Jeff, your thoughts this time first. The GSEs are asking for more, and the AMCs are asking for less, or offering less. What's an appraiser supposed to do?
Well, I think it's worth acknowledging that we've had such a wild shift in the market for appraisal services. From the pandemic, if I look at 2020 through the current, today we're recording the end of 2024. There was a time where appraisers were so busy that there was upward pressure on fees, and AMCs, I heard anecdotally, feeling misused by appraisers who were charging, too much in their minds, whatever that is. And now the things have flipped, and there's a certain aspect of market dynamics here, Tim, that there's been downward pressure on fees in some segments of the appraisal space, and I've also heard anecdotally of AMCs being put out to bid against each other. And I mean, many residential appraisers don't like the bidding process, which I understand where that comes from. On the commercial side, it's pretty common to bid out jobs and get a portion of them, but it's a little bit different, scenario, in that space. But sometimes I think those bids are because the AMC is vying to get the job in the first place. So there are some market dynamics that I think aren't always readily apparent, to the appraiser who just is on the receiving end. But what I would say is appraisers have to make business decisions, but they also have to make compliance with standards, compliance with USPAP decisions as well. And if somebody's desperate to pay a bill or feed their family and accepts a lower fee assignment, that doesn't negate the need to comply with USPAP, to comply with what you're saying you're doing in reports. Just because somebody pays a lower fee isn't licensed to, cut corners or not do things that you shouldn't do in that assignment. Of course, there are alternative sources for work for residential appraisers, than just AMC work. But the appraiser has to decide from the business side, what makes sense in terms of the fee I can accept. But they also have to decide, am I going to put in the time and due diligence and care to the assignment, regardless of how high or low the fee is, to meet my professional obligations. And I just hope that appraisers aren't trying to cut corners because fees are reduced in this very difficult, low volume environment.
Hey, Jeff, thank you. I appreciate that. Craig, the same question essentially, but a little bit different angle on it. So we've got the GSEs demanding more for whatever reasons. We've got the AMCs offering less, and Jeff pointed out a number of reasons why that could be. So in light of those two questions that we just asked, I'm going to put this question to you. Okay, how does the appraiser thread that needle?
Well, I think first of all, we have to recognize that simply because somebody asks me to perform an assignment at a lower fee than I feel comfortable with doesn't mean that you can you can certainly come back and say, I'd love to do the assignment, but this is the fee that I believe I can perform the assignment for. And we routinely do that, by the way. I mean, we will frequently have someone offer a fee that is lower than we're willing to do it for. And we'll come back and with a counter offer and suggest that we can't do it for that, but we can do it for this, and this would be our turn time. And obviously, we don't get all of the assignments when we do that. But it's, I don't know, Jeff, you probably know better than I, but I would say at least 50, 60% of the time you get the assignment anyway. And so I think it's important to recognize that simply because someone offers a lower fee than you feel comfortable with doesn't mean I automatically have to turn it down. And we routinely see people come in and offer bids, give me a fee and a turn time. And the anecdotally, we kind of worry, well, it's just all based on how cheap and how fast. And frequently that's the case. But oftentimes, if we just ignore those assignment requests, we are turning away without really providing a option for the client to select me as the appraiser. And so we bid on many of these assignments, and usually what we find is that you get in some of the outlying areas where there's not a lot of people willing to do some of the assignments. You can oftentimes get a reasonable fee that because people just aren't anxious to go out into some of these outlying areas that aren't as convenient. And so I think the first thing I would suggest is that don't automatically reject the assignment because you don't think the fee is adequate. Suggest a fee that you think is adequate. I think the second thing that we still need to be looking at is how to become more efficient at performing the assignments that we have to do. And I think that some of the technologies that are available can make you a little more efficient and productive. So frequently we get into a routine that we never look at the ways to improve our process so that we can do things a little better. And there's a lot of really useful tools that can help you in filling out providing the report content in a more effective way. There's a lot of tools where it will merge in with your MLS data, auto populate information from the grid, a lot of tools that will help in providing some of the analytics to support adjustments. There's, one of the really interesting tools, and I'm always surprised at how many people aren't aware of this, is that built right in the operating system within Windows 11. If I push the Windows button and the letter H, it will pop up a microphone on your screen, at which point it will do voice to text. And so if we are not thrilled about having to sit down and type things out frequently, you can provide some of the commentary that's necessary much easier than perhaps we think it is. And then if you use some of the really nice little editing tools that are available, like Grammarly, it will make it readable. It'll help fix the spelling and and things. And those are tools that make our reports look better. They make us perform a little faster than we might otherwise be able to do it, and still provides that credibility that Jeff was talking about. So I believe that there are ways to become more efficient at doing some of the things that we do, but you as Jeff pointed out, it's always a mistake to take a low fee and then try to make the argument that well, they didn't pay very much, so I'm not going to do very much. We're looking at it completely wrong if we're thinking of our assignments in that way.
Let me distill what you've said. So basically, you're saying it's perfectly okay to negotiate a fee, and then appraisers need to take advantage. And my internet connection is unstable. Okay, and appraisers need to take advantage of the technical tools that are available to them. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's exactly it.
Okay. All right. We're going to move on, but Jeff, please take 30 seconds and plug your Mark and your podcast, please.
Well, that's kind, Tim. I definitely appreciate it. We did a few episodes back in our podcast, Market Moves with Mark and Jeff, had on the guy who wrote the book on artificial intelligence in appraising and valuation, Jim Amron, and went through kind of live sharing a screen, kind of like in this environment, and just interrogated ways through Chat GPT that we could extract, trends within a market in a Houston suburb, what were bedrooms worth, what were bathrooms worth. Jim kind of walked through some best practices on how to support adjustments, or at least get information out of a system like that. Fun episode. We had a good time doing that, Tim. So I appreciate the opportunity. But there are practical ways that we can do what we're talking about here, and Mark and I have been trying to explore some market realities as far as what's going on out there, and would encourage anybody to give that a listen as well if you're interested.
And go ahead and plug the name.
Excellent. Market Moves with Mark and Jeff is the name of the podcast. We're on YouTube and Spotify, Apple Podcasts, kind of wherever you typically listen to stuff. YouTube, you can see some of the stuff that we show and share, so you get the visual aspect there. But I appreciate it, Tim. Thank you.
Oh, sure. All right, gentlemen, let's get back to this. Let's talk about waivers. And some folks, you say waivers, and some folks want to make the sign of the cross to ward off evil. So let's talk about waivers. There was a publication a couple of weeks ago. And again, Jeff said we're recording this at the end of December of 2024. So there was a publication a couple of weeks ago indicating that the GSEs are now willing to offer a waiver on a very limited number of loans to a very limited number of borrowers, up to 97% loan to value. But that too many appraisers have taken a look at that and said, oh, the GSEs are now going to offer waivers on 97% of the loans they make, which isn't even close to true. So, Craig, from a standpoint of waivers, and again, you get all over the country, appraisers all over the country. And again, you and I have sat down with Scott and Lyle and and Danny, and we've discussed this with them, and they're a lot more sanguine about it than most appraisers are. What are your thoughts on waivers and how they're going to affect the business? And then, Jeff, when your dad's done, please take the same question.
The waivers are simply an opportunity where the risk is low, the credit scores are high, and they have a comfort level with the value of the property based on their modeling, to where they're going to the lender and saying, if you don't want to get an appraisal, you don't have to. And frequently, what the GSEs are saying is that they still frequently opt for the appraisal anyway, because the purchase agreement has a appraisal contingency with it, or the property owners would rather pay a few extra $100 to get the appraisal done. And so the offer of a waiver doesn't automatically mean that there won't be an appraisal done. Now, one of the concepts that I like to teach real estate agents, and I do some continuing education for real estate agents, and we talk about this waiver concept with them. And honestly, the advice I give them is that, listen, if you're trying, and an agent has a different obligation than an appraiser does. An agent is an advocate for their client, and they're trying to do what's in their client's best interest. And frankly, the waiver for a real estate agent, it's in their best interest to accept the waiver. But frequently, there will be an appraisal contingency in the purchase agreement. And the advice that I provide for the real estate agents is say, that's fine. The advantage you now have is that you can close the deal, and the appraisal from the lending side isn't going to be an issue. but you can still come back and your borrower can still hire an appraiser to perform the appraisal to get the waiver or to get the appraisal contingency removed. And it gives them some negotiating power that is independent of the loan. And so we are frequently seeing, and I think that as work slows down a little bit, it's appropriate for appraisers to come in and say, listen, I can provide a much wider range of services to a much wider range of clientele. And this is one of the services that I can provide. And so if you're having an opportunity to talk a little bit about what's going on in valuation at a lunch and learn with your local real estate board, being able to sit down and explain some of the nuances with this is a great way to develop a book of business that maybe hasn't been being developed in the past, that still allows you to help them solve a valuation problem that is outside of the direct lender or the AMC. And the advantage for the real estate agent is that the agent is now aware of the appraiser community. They can select someone who is competent. And then I have a much broader range of, I can adjust the scope of work. I can do a restricted appraisal, or I can adjust the scope of work to solve the problem that might allow me to do the report a little quicker and at a lower fee than I would based on the scope of work associated with the typical lender assignment. So that's the first element, is that the fact that waivers are being offered doesn't necessarily mean that there is not going to be an appraisal. The lender may determine with consultation with the borrower to get one anyway, or it may be that there's some alternative work that we can develop on the basis of that. I think the second element of that is that we have a new administration. The GSEs are a little worried about what political changes are going to happen, and they are in conservatorship, so that you have FHFA that is overseeing their activities, and there's some indication that perhaps the waivers may not be as extensive as previously believed. And so I think, as a practical matter, they've had a large percentage of the loans that are being purchased by Fannie Mae in the secondary market. Something, I think, Tim, you can correct me, but I think it's something in the neighborhood of 60% of all their loans are being done through waivers. And with the higher LTVs, that could go up a little bit. But there is some indication that the investors who are buying these mortgage-backed securities are saying, I don't know how we feel about a high ratio loan to value without an appraisal. And so while the waiver is certainly something, and frankly, I think as appraisers, sometimes we fail to realize that from the lender's perspective, they love waivers, because when Fannie or Freddie offers a waiver for the appraisal, it eliminates risk of a buyback due to a faulty appraisal. And so, if I'm a lender making a loan and they say, hey, you don't have to get an appraisal on this one, it's an advantage to the lender, because it's one less element of risk for a loan buyback that goes away. And so for appraisers, maybe not the best thing, but from a practical standpoint, it's part of the reality that we're dealing with, and finding ways to recognize that it's probably not going to be as terrible as we think it will be. And there may be some ways to leverage the waivers to develop alternative valuation tools and services that can help mitigate some of that.
Craig, thank you for that analysis. Jeff, please, your take on the issue of waivers.
I appreciate it, Tim. If you'll indulge one other reference to the podcast that Mark and I have been doing, we've had a couple of interesting people on exploring this topic specifically. We had Ed Pinto from the American Enterprise Institute come on and talk a little bit about their perspective and data that they've been tracking regarding waivers. some interesting trends in where waivers are potentially offered and not. Just very interesting conversation. Also some perspective on the political ramifications of a new administration and the likelihood of maybe a change of status within the conservatorship relationship of the Fannie Mae's and Freddie Mac's. Interesting conversation there. We have one that will be releasing probably this week, which is a conversation with Danny Wiley from Freddie Mac, and he had some really interesting perspectives on this, particular topic as well, Tim. And one of the things that's interesting is Freddie has studied internally of all of the properties that qualify for a waiver, which ones were actually took advantage of it versus which ones went forward with an appraisal. And they've done some internal analysis on those two differing data sets. And to my dad's point, there are a lot that, though they qualify for a waiver, they still end up going forward with the appraisal anyway. Their perspective, and I think you kind of alluded to this as well, Tim, in setting up the question, is that expanding this LTV, like this most recent announcement of the waivers, the perspective is that it's not going to have a dramatic increase in the total number of waivers that are offered, because the LTV is only one of multiple factors that get considered in whether a waiver is even offered or not. And there's another interesting aspect to this that I've wondered a little bit about and don't have a lot of research or data on yet. But in the higher LTV scenario, you also have potentially private mortgage insurance companies that get involved. And I don't really know what their perspective is on waivers, but you've got another party that's involved in the transaction that also may or may not be on board with with offering the waivers in that scenario as well. And like I said, that's something I'm looking forward to diving into a little bit more deeply. I don't know what that perspective is, but in this high LTV space, you do introduce that aspect as well.
So basically what you're saying is, okay, somebody wants to put 3% down and they got a 550 FICO score and they've been unemployed for 6 months, that a waiver ain't going to happen. Whereas if they got an 850 FICO score and their house is paid for already and they're borrowing 50K to go on a cruise, and they've been at the same job for 25 years, then of course they're going to get a waiver because there's essentially no risk to the loan. So it's not that 97% of 97% of loans are going to be funded without an appraisal. It just merely means that under certain very limited circumstances, under certain very limited conditions, a very limited number of borrowers will be offered a waiver at a 97% LTV, correct?
Well, and yes, as I understand it, Tim, as well, there was a nuance that came out of this conversation that we had recently with Danny, and that being that part of that decision is independent of the borrower and their strength, but is also a function of what data do the GSEs have already on the property that they're looking at buying the loan against. And so if they've got a recent appraisal and they have good data in the neighborhood, the likelihood of that property qualifying for a waiver is much higher. They're not doing waivers on new construction where they don't have actual measurements and description of improvements. If a home hasn't been appraised or isn't in their system or hasn't been looked at in 20 years or something, homes like that are very unlikely to get a waiver offer, even if the strength of the borrower is that second scenario that you laid out. And so that decision on whether the waiver is granted or not has a lot to do with the property itself and the data that they may or may not have on that property, based on its transaction history.
Jeff, thank you. Gentlemen, I've got one more question of you. And please put your state regulator hats on. I know, Craig, you've been off the board a number of years. Jeff, you either just rolled off or you're going to roll off very quickly. But you've both been state regulators. You both chaired the board. You've sat there and you've looked at appraisers and tried to read their minds and souls. So let me ask you this question. Fannie Mae is sending out, excuse me, I don't mean to restrict it to Fannie Mae. The GSEs are sending out a lot of love letters. And eventually, some of those are going to end up on the desks of state regulators. All right. Are state regulators going to take these love letters seriously? Or are they just going to say, you know, Fannie's just covering its assets and this really doesn't mean anything? So, you know, we're going to make a little noise and we'll slap the appraiser's hand and, you know, hit the appraiser with a $300 fine and take a USPAP class, and it ain't no big deal. So in other words, where do you see state appraisal boards going with an increased number of complaints? And I'm assuming, I don't know this, I'm assuming there is going to be an increased number of complaints given the number of love letters the GSEs are sending out. How are states going to treat these? And are states going to look to rehabilitate? Are they going to look to sanction? Or are they going to say, this is silly, we got better things to do, and just dismiss them? Craig, why don't you go first on this one?
Well, Tim, like you, occasionally I'll have appraisers who want help with a complaint. And we have seen, and I've seen a number of these Fannie Mae letters that are being sent to the state, and the information on the ones that I have seen, and I know that they have a kind of a dual level, that they have the lower threshold is that we found some inconsistencies, or we didn't feel like the data, or there were sales that should have been considered that weren't. And so they send out these letters, but they're so generic, it's really hard to pinpoint, well, what exactly were the sales that the appraiser should have considered that they didn't? Well, it's not included in the complaint. And we have seen some of the states open up an investigation and look at that. And on the ones that I've been involved with, where a complaint has been formalized and they've investigated it, they've been able to provide their information and get them dismissed with nothing, no sanctions, no reprimand letters, nothing. But there are some where there are some legitimate concerns where the GSEs will then go in and be a little more detailed in what they believe the deficiencies are. And in those cases, there will be a more proactive status or position from the state on their investigation, and they will jump into that a little more seriously and take action. And so the best thing that we can do is make sure that we have enough information in the appraisal and in our work files so that if someone has a concern about what we've done, you've got all of the material to simply explain the process we went through. And more often than not, if you've done that, you're not going to have an issue. But and the way states handle them vary from state to state. I believe that on some of these letters that are being provided, the GSEs are really, especially with Fannie Mae, they're just saying, hey, we found some issues here. This isn't, they're what they call them a tip letter. It's just, hey, here's a tip. We think that there's some issues with this appraisal. Either open an investigation or not. I mean, they're not as, it's not expected that they're going to devote a lot of resources into that. When they go to a formal complaint, and I think Lyle was saying that they sent out last year maybe a couple thousand tip letters and a couple hundred complaints. And when they send out the complaint, it's a And that's with, I think I can't remember the numbers, Tim, but it was a small percentage, something in the neighborhood of 8-10 million appraisals. You're getting a very small percentage that are getting sent out as a tip letter, and a very even smaller percentage are sent out as a complaint. And when they get sent out as a complaint, they have a lot more detail, and it's incumbent upon the appraiser. Number one is don't react emotionally, and get some help to come in and write up a response to these complaints that get sent in, whether it's Fannie Mae or anybody else, so that you can articulately and competently explain why you did what you did. And when you do that, you rarely have, provided you haven't really messed things up, you rarely have a problem.
Craig, thank you. Jeff, your take on the same issue, please.
Yeah, you bet. I appreciate it, Tim. It varies, just as my dad's laid out. It depends on the nature of the complaint, and it depends on the state's policy and how they handle and are equipped to receive and screen and then investigate, those complaints. I do see from the sources that I've got information on, I think a lot of the sources of the complaints where there are some investigations eventually being opened are, coming from the GSE referrals or formal complaints. I was talking with an appraiser recently who had just gone through the process, and recognized that there were some things that should have been done better, but at the end of the day, went through the process, felt like the state was fair in the way that they handled it. It ended up getting dismissed. It's such a stressful thing. I think my dad, makes a good point. Whether, regardless of the source, anytime you get a communication from the state, it's an emotional experience. To not respond emotionally is maybe harder than it sounds on the surface. Getting help from you, Tim, or my dad, or others that provide services out there to help rationally, think through, construct responses, address, as effectively as possible, I think probably goes a longer way to resolving the, whatever the complaint may be, as effectively as possible. I don't know anybody who doesn't go through an experience like that and not learn something and not commit to, well, I have an understanding now of how the state views, whatever the perceived deficiencies are, and whether there's action taken or not. It's a tremendous learning and growing experience. It's not one that any of us, raise our hands and volunteer for, but there are certainly effective ways to, to respond to it. And it's stressful and frustrating. I've seen the same statistics, that my dad referenced from Lyle on the relatively small percentage of the total appraisals they receive where any sort of, letter is being sent on to the state. But it does vary from state to state as to how they, respond and, what action ultimately ends up getting taken.
All right, Jeff, thank you. All right, gentlemen, we've gone a little bit over time. That's my fault, not yours. So any final thoughts on anything that we've covered, or pet peeve that needs to be aired, or suggestion that needs to be made? Jeff, anything?
Well, I appreciate it, Tim. It's I always enjoy these conversations. Appreciate the invite to come on and discuss. Appraising is a challenging profession. It takes, time and experience to become proficient at it. And I think those that are interested in understanding the ground truth as it exists, out there in the market, for the properties we're appraising, as well as in the market for the services that we offer. Markets are dynamic and change. We have to evolve and change with them. That's not to compromise standards, but it's to recognize what the users of our services actually want. And so I'd appreciate your effort here, Tim, in exploring these topics and, providing some analysis and discussion. I hope, and I believe that the future is bright for appraisers. I believe that in order for that to be the case, we're going to have to perpetually evolve and get better at what we do. And I think we can do that as a profession, but my expectation, my hope is that we are and will, but there's room to go yet, but I look forward to the journey.
Okay, Jeff. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. Craig, your thoughts?
Well, I think that, Tim, overall, I'm more optimistic about the future than many are, because I think that as we, we're looking at all of these things that are concerning to us with the waivers and regulators and discipline and changing. One of the things I was talking to an appraiser yesterday who was completely unaware that the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, GSE modernization is going to result in a completely new way in which the information is being communicated back to appraisers or back to the lenders, and was just like, "Oh, you got to be kidding me! They're gonna change the form." And I think that as appraisers, we have got to stay abreast of what's going on in our local markets, what's going on at a national level. We need to stay informed as to what's going on around us. And if we just kind of stick in our basement in our pajamas and don't get out and do anything to market ourselves, to improve our skill set, add value to the process, it's probably going to be, appraising may become a obsolete option for people in that situation. But I'm pretty optimistic that if we will stay on top of the emerging trends, find ways to be relevant, find ways to better market ourselves, provide services that are not easily provided through AI and some of these other tools that are out there, that we're going to have a viable program, profession. But it's going to change what we're doing and how we're doing it, and we just have got to be willing to adapt as the nature of the valuation problems that are being asked to be solved change. And so, I think that if we will stay on top of things, we'll be able to add value and be able to make it a viable profession.
Okay. All right, Craig, thank you. Jeff, one more time, your email address, please.
You bet. J, the letter J, Morley, MORLEY, at Accurity, ACCURITY.com.
Thank you. And Mr. Craig, please, your email address.
My email address is jmorley at accurity.com. You can
you're just trying to palm this off on your son. No, fair, Dad. Can't do that.
No, if you want to get a hold of me, valupro at gmail.com, no E in value. So feel free to reach out anytime, and we're happy to help if we can.
Good deal. Gentlemen, let me thank you both. I appreciate the fact that you're here. I appreciate your wisdom. I appreciate your experience. And it's on a personal note, it's an honor to call you both friends. So we will continue to be in touch, and I want to thank everybody for watching. And if you have any questions, get a hold of me, or send the checks to me, send the hate mail to Craig and Jeff. But you can get in touch with me at Tim at the appraisersadvocate.com, and that's on the screen, so you don't have to memorize that. So again, Jeff, Craig, thank you. Best to your families. And let's see, Jeff, you're presenting at ACTS in April, are you not?
No, I don't have a presentation in the 2-day general session. We are doing an offsite kind of measuring and mobile technology introduction focused on trainees. We will have some appraisers coming as well, but we've got a kind of a full day on Sunday with a supervisor trainee event, the offsite experience in the morning, and then ADI workshop, and then a supervisor training focused event in the afternoon as well. So would encourage anybody to check out ACTS and check out some of the pre-conference activities going on there. I will be heavily involved with that and looking forward to it, Tim. I appreciate you mentioning that.
Okay, Jeff, thank you. Craig, you're presenting, are you not?
Not this time. And we did last time, but I haven't been invited to present. So, but I'd be happy to talk to anybody who comes out and love to get acquainted with any of you on a personal basis. So if you're at AX, come and find us, and we'll be there, and be happy to chat a little bit if you're there.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for being with us here today. We appreciate it very much. And so let me wish you all and we look forward to the next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.